Vice President Mike Pence is standing by the Supreme Court Justice Brett Kavanaugh following new allegations of misconduct. In an interview with Fox News, Pence said that the New York Times should, quote, be ashamed for publishing a story smearing Brett Kavanaugh.
At least 6 Democrats called for the Supreme Court Justice's impeachment following the story, which was adapted from the book The Education of Brett Kavanaugh, an Investigation. Here to discuss the controversy surrounding the Supreme Court Justice and their book and what they found are co-authors and New York Times reporters Robin Pogrebin and Kate Kelly. Ladies, thank you. Congratulations on the book.
Thank you.
Kate, let me start with you. I think one of the tricky things in this story and all of the Me Too stories is how do you report this in a way that is sort of fundamentally fair when it's very hard to get corroboration when you're talking about maybe 1 or 2 people in the room? So how did you think about that as you approached this?
You're pointing out a great challenge in this kind of reporting, and I agree with you. It's there. We came at this from a very objective perspective, and we thought, let's start from scratch. Let's actually take both Justice Kavanaugh and Christine Blasey-Ford at face value. Let's believe both of them and see if we can sort of corroborate her story on the one hand, and on his hand, hard to prove a negative, but just talk to folks who knew him at the time, who were obviously alleged to be there at the incident, and see if we can shed further light that either kind of proves that this happened or disproves it. What we found is it's very complicated. First of all, on the subject of memory and trauma, sex crimes prosecutors, memory experts that we talked to told us your memory tends to be very spotty if you've been through a traumatic situation like that. That was alleged. So you've got memories that pertain to this sort of the incident itself, and maybe how you got out, and then other random things, but not necessarily like all the details of how things came together or the transportation, and that was the case here. What we found was there were substantiating details around Ford. She dated one of Kavanaugh's good friends, a guy named Chris Garrett. Her friend Leland Kaiser, who was alleged to be at the party, dated his friend Mark Judge, who was alleged to be in the room. She has a history of credibility. We have not found anybody, including an ex-boyfriend, whose affidavit was used as sort of a way to undermine her by Republicans during the confirmation process. There were facts out there about their history together that seemed to question her fear of flying, for example, that he gave. But he, at the bottom line, told me and told the Senate that she had no history of lying and she could not lie.
But one of the things you didn't mention there is that Leland Kaiser, in your book, who was supposedly the one who drove her home, says that she doesn't think that it happened and that there was a smear and pressure campaign against her and by her own friends in order to corroborate Christine Blasey-Ford's allegation.
That's right, and I'm so glad you brought that up because I think that's one of the big revelations of our book. So Leland Kaiser, who was the friend who was alleged to be at the party, and the only other girl allegedly there, and by all accounts a very good friend of Ford's and a person who dated Mark Judge, told us that she doesn't have confidence in the story. Now, I'll break it down. She has consistently said she doesn't remember what happened. Her lawyer said that, she said that. On the margin of, whether she finds it believable, last year she said, Ford is my friend, was my friend at the time, and I believe her. Subsequently, and we explain all this in our book with the first on-the-record interview with her that anybody's had, she testified, or rather gave an interview to the FBI and said what she could remember, if anything, about those times and kind of the circumstances, but not remembering the event. Days later, she studied pictures of Brett Kavanaugh from when he was young. She looked at maps of the area. She rested up, and she thought, I'm bothered by this. I don't have confidence in this. I don't remember him from that time. I do remember Judge. I obviously remember Chrissy. I don't remember gatherings like that. I don't think I would have been at the Columbia Country Club on a day like that. So there were a number of things that made her question it, although she still doesn't remember for sure.
I mean, that seems pretty significant to me. Robin,
does.
I mean, your book has caused a massive controversy within this country. It's caused Democrats to literally call for impeachment. There's, of course, the handling of the story by your own outlet over at the New York Times. You sent a tweet recently blaming Fox News for for distorting some of the errors in the reporting. Why are you blaming Fox News for this failure?
I actually didn't blame Fox News.
You quoted from
I just
from a
retweeted the Vox article, which I thought, kind of finally added sort of a little bit of balance to this, which is that, people have, we basically set out to do a book that revisits these events in kind of a calm way with the benefit of 10 months of investigation. We've written a book that's almost 300 pages. We spent 10 months doing it. It's, these paragraphs that have been pulled out and seized upon are 2 paragraphs in that book. So we haven't highlighted them. They're not the focus of this.
But your paper did.
On our paper, we did this Deborah Ramirez excerpt in which that was also 1 paragraph, and unfortunately that line was removed and it was put back and corrected.
Explain it for people who haven't followed all. Just explain that a little bit more.
So basically we decided that we wanted to try to pick an excerpt from this book in order to, which we often do in the Times, and that we thought the Deborah Ramirez story was compelling because it was kind of neglected in the first time around. She never testified publicly.
And she's the woman who alleged that while they were at Yale together, there was...
He exposed himself to her at a party.
Yes.
And that it was kind of lost in the kind of what seemed like a pile-on of allegations, when actually we found that 7 people had at least heard about it before he became a federal judge, which we thought was meaningful, and also shedding light on, frankly, her experience and why that confrontation was so formative. So we did that excerpt. In it, we mentioned this additional allegation, which hasn't been reported, that another classmate saw him do the same kind of thing at another dorm party freshman year. We thought it was germane because it kind of reinforced the Deborah Ramirez experience, and so we included it. In that piece, we did have a line naming her and saying that that she told friends she didn't remember it. An editor took it out.
Because it named her, and that's not normally the editorial policy of the Times.
Exactly.
I do want to talk about that, because the person who allegedly saw this incident, Mr. Max Stier, as I understand it, he was on the opposing team from Kavanaugh during the Clinton impeachment, and his wife was denied a federal judgeship by the GOP. Did you include that information in your book? I mean, that seems like pretty clear evidence of a vendetta against Brett Kavanaugh.
We didn't include it in the book. We do talk about what he's been doing for most of his career, which is nonpartisan.
Well, I mean, for somebody to accuse somebody of like this, and a victim does not even remember this incident, you don't think that is a germane detail?
Do you think it's germane that Brett Kavanaugh wrote the Starr report?
Yes, absolutely.
Going after
absolutely, and he was grilled for that when he was in his impeachment.
Except that he maintained that he's a judge now, and he's made fair decisions, and it wasn't fair to think of him completely as a partisan person with a partisan agenda just because he worked for Starr and just because he worked for George Bush.
I think that is germane.
He was hit for it.
But this history goes back to the 1990s. Max Stier is a central figure in Michael Lewis's book, The Fifth Risk, which is also a great read. And it's all about Max Stier's good governance effort, his nonpartisan effort. If you ask around Washington, as I'm sure you have, he's a very well-respected guy
on both sides
deals with both
Brett
sides of the aisle.
A well-respected guy, right? I mean,
he did not want this to become politicized. This is why he privately went to senators and the FBI and tried to have his story be heard.
That's right. And if he had an agenda, why didn't he do it during the hearings when he could have blown it up?
Well, he did do it during the hearings, and he went to these investigators.
Privately, and he was ignored.
He had no interest in going to the press.
Because they didn't think that it was germane.
But they didn't even investigate it.
Yeah.
Kate, let me ask you, though, what was, obviously this has become a huge story, both in the way it was covered and was this omission appropriate, and different people have spun it the way that they wanted to spin it.
That's right, and that's a key point of our book, is people see what they want to see.
What they want to see.
They're imposing their own worldview onto the facts.
Just on a human level, as you watch Elizabeth Warren and other Democratic contenders come out and call for his impeachment based on your reporting, I mean, what emotion, what did that spark for you? What did that feel like?
I mean, let me say on the one hand, whether it applies to the Democratic candidates or President Trump, who's been tweeting that people like us should be fired, we are.
Said Kavanaugh should sue you for libel.
Right. We are grateful to know that people are noticing our work. Obviously, on the substance of the matter, on the calls for impeachment, I would say people should read the book and then decide whether they still feel that way. People are entitled to their points of view. We very studiously avoided opining on what should happen from here, if anything. I think one interesting take on this was written by Jen Rubin in the Washington Post, which was the idea that there should be a House investigation, if nothing else, of the confirmation process and the FBI inquiry. Was it wide enough in scope? Did we learn what we needed to learn? How can we ensure a fair process for people going forward? I don't think Justice Kavanaugh would say it was a fair process. And I don't think the women would either.
One thing I also want to get to is, I think he suggested in a recent interview that Brett Kavanaugh said he would talk to you, but only if you wrote that he didn't talk to you. Did he just say he would talk to you off the record, or did he actually say that?
We had back and forth negotiations with him and a representative where we were kind of trying to come to terms on this. We obviously very much wanted to speak to him. It was important. We wanted to reflect his views, and we also, frankly, are trying to kind of portray him as a character who's like 360 degrees of a human being.
Three-dimensional.
Three-dimensional.
Right.
And so we were just about to do that and kind of come to D.C. to see him, and we even were willing to say nothing about what the terms were, just leave that out. And unfortunately, they wanted a line in that actually said he declined to comment, and we felt that would have misled the readers.
Yeah, that's
So
fair.
they asked us to affirmatively say that Justice Kavanaugh declined to be interviewed for the book, even if we had an
Even if he
off-the-record
spoke with
discussion
you.
with him.
Suggested
So let me ask you this, Robin, we'll leave it here. I mean, given your experience, months and months reporting this story and what you found, and I'm sure you thought deeply about the implications of it, where do you sort of come down on how old allegations, even if they're proven true from high school, from college, how they should be viewed in a person's career at this point in their life if they have changed the way that you've portrayed Kavanaugh to it?
Yeah, we've really wrestled with that because
Yeah.
I can really see both sides. That even if he did these things at 17 and 18, as bad as they were, perhaps he's in the last 36 years really seems to have been a better person, and in terms of his behavior and his conduct, he's widely admired. Should this kind of ruin his life forever? I mean, I think that's a real question. On the other hand, I think it's important that these allegations are taken seriously.
Yeah.
And I also think, basically, there are some people who argue that, this kind of behavior is a gateway to other aggressive behavior, and that kind of a person doesn't deserve to be on the court. We decided that's not our determination to make.
Yeah.
Well,
Very
thank you so much for
interesting.
joining us.
Thanks for
Really
having
appreciate
us.
Thank you.
Appreciate it.
Next on Rising, more than 44 million Americans have student debt.
And it's a problem that is only growing. Our conversation on the student loan crisis and what solutions are on the table when Rising continues.